listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have a barn scorcher of a show today, remote but ever present. In the first hour, we'll be joined by author John Ross to discuss the economic impact of the COVID-19 virus, the mass layoffs, the profiteering by Congress and drug companies, and what will be the long-term economic impact on the domestic front if this continues. We'll also get into how China grappled with the economic realities of the virus, and under the model where things fall apart, does this allow leeway into a system beyond capitalism? For that matter, what does that even look like? Be sure to stay for the second hour if you're feeling strong and you got something on your chest that you've been nesting, that you've been saving. Today is the day for the Come At Me Bro segment. We're going to have an extended edition, an extended hoedown with several questions where we're going to get the opportunity to mix it up. What should Sanders do now? Is Tulsi Gabbard backing Joe Biden an indication that the Russians tricked the Democratic Party into backing Joe Biden? He's senile, so it's kind of like supporting Boris Yeltsin. What would offering Elizabeth Warren a VP spot unify the Democratic Party? Oh, more importantly, should it? More importantly, should it? And in fact, let's start there. Let's start there. Pursuant to that last question, today is a special day. A fascinating bit of information will be released today that has been withheld and kept in the dark, in the shadows. On this day, March 20th, Elizabeth Warren's dark money super PAC will have to disclose its oligarchs, capitalists, and Democratic functionaries that funnel money to her campaign, propping her up during Super Tuesday to split the lefty vote, weakening Sanders at the worst of moments. At this point, it was clear that Warren had no chance of even winning a state, let alone the primary, and yet Elizabeth Warren stayed in the race, relentlessly attacked the person chosen by the left, her friend and ally Bernie Sanders. Again, let's be very clear. The margins in several of these states were so close that the splitting of the vote in and of itself was enough to give Joe Biden a dominant win in some of those states. Massachusetts, for example, if I'm not mistaken, Maine, Texas. This set a crippling narrative also going forward of Joe Biden's renewed invincibility, meaning it wasn't just the delegates that were lost by Sanders not being able to take those states with the consolidation of the left. If you remember, this is when the moderates consolidated. This would have been a time if you cared anything about the left and cared anything about ideological development of your particular cause and your particular objectives. This would have been the time to fall in line. She didn't do that. She didn't do that at all. The narrative going forward was that Joe Biden was once again invincible and Sanders was too far behind to catch up. Right now, there's a conversation going on about what Joe Biden needs to do to get the progressive vote in the election. And without fail, invariably, Elizabeth Warren's name is pathetically dredged up by some lefties brought into the conversation. And yes, I use the term pathetic because it's literally pathetic. She betrayed you on multiple levels. The notion that your reward betrayal is absolutely obscene. Not just obscene, it incentivizes you to continue to be misused. Let's remember for a moment, because I think some of you might have forgotten this. I don't know how, I don't know why, but perhaps some of us have. Let's remember for the moment how this all started. Let's listen to the clip of Elizabeth Warren entering this race.
I've spent my career getting to the bottom of why America's promise works for some families, but others who work just as hard slip through the cracks into disaster. And what I've found is terrifying. These aren't cracks that families are falling into, they're traps. America's middle class is under attack. How do we get here? Billionaires and big corporations decided they wanted more of the pie, and they enlisted politicians to cut them a fatter slice. They crippled unions so no one could stop them.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
Dismantled the financial rules meant to keep us safe after the Great Depression, and cut their own taxes so they paid less than their secretaries and janitors. It's time to write the rules for the middle class.
Big progressive policy. That was her exploration video. Sanders could have written that video. Aggressive, populist rhetoric. We're going to fight for the middle class, Wall Street. That's her campaign. Effectively, she went grifting for votes in cash from the left distribution of the political spectrum. She knows Sanders was going to run, and basically she was pulling votes from his lane, getting lefties to back her, with a bonus that if she can get across this notion that she's effectively just like Sanders, she's a woman and she's younger. When? She hit another Bernie note in the context of this campaign. Listen to this one. Here's a clip of Warren talking about and going after how much she hate dark money super PACs. Let's hear the clip.
I'm not taking a dime of PAC money in this campaign. There's more. I'm not taking a single check from a federal lobbyist. I'm not taking applications from billionaires who want to run a super PAC on my behalf. And I challenge every other candidate who asks for your vote in this primary to say exactly the same thing.
That didn't age well at all. That didn't age well at all. All of that lasted. All of that principle, rock solid values in the way that she said it. That was her term, rock solid values. That lasted until she got desperate for dollars. But it's important, and I want to linger on this one for a bit from the standpoint of the super PAC, because it needs to be understood how vitally important that super PAC ended up being in keeping her in this race for Super Tuesday. Warren's support had dried up after she was found to be dishonest at this point. And the man that has never attacked her, she attacked relentlessly. She claimed she was working for the left. She claimed she was working for big structural change. She went so far as to even rip off Bernie's language when Sanders had that iconic statement of, go out there and work with somebody else like you were working for yourself. She even ripped that off. Many people bought that. Yes, I was on my soapbox gesticulating and shaking a bit and whatnot, saying, no, don't trust her. But a lot of lefties did. You had networks like TYT, reporters like Ryan Graham, all these guys were pushing her as if her and Sanders was somehow a 1-to-1, or at the very least a 1.8. Warren flames out. She's broke. She stays in the race. Bernie conditions have started to get adverse because all of the moderates consolidated. She has no chance of winning a state, stressing that, not even her own state, let alone the entirety of the primary. And she starts to use a super PAC to allow her to stay in the race until Super Tuesday, to get through Super Tuesday. And after she got through Super Tuesday, what happened? That super PAC went away. Persist PAC. $14 million spent on Elizabeth Warren's behalf to keep Warren in the race. Basically, plutocrats, oligarchs, Democratic functionaries, anybody that needed to keep her in that race, understanding that her being in that race hit Sanders in the knees by splitting the vote at a time where he needed a consolidation of the left. They understood it. That's the entire point of that super PAC. And how did Warren explain this level of hypocrisy? Meaning, even if you take aside for the point that she is running on the left, using and grifting the left for votes and cash, and yet she's hurting the person who the left has roundly chosen as their particular champion, how does she justify doing that? Let's hear it. Warren blames men for accepting the super PAC. You don't believe me? Let's hear the clip.
Let's take a listen.
Do you want the super PAC supporting you to stand down?
So look, the first day I got in this race over a year ago, I said, I hope every presidential candidate who comes in will agree. No super PACs for any of us. I renewed that call dozens of times, and I couldn't get a single Democrat to go along with me. Finally, we reached the point a few weeks ago where all of the men who are still in this race and on the debate stage all had either super PACs or they were multi-billionaires and could just, rummage around in their sock drawers and find enough money to be able to fund a campaign. And the only people who didn't have them were the two women. And at that point, there are some women around the country who said, that's just not right. So here's where I stand. If all the candidates want to get rid of super PACs, count me in. I'll lead the charge. But that's how it has to be. It can't be the case that a bunch of people keep them and only one or two.
Basically, all of these men kept their super PACs as if the super PAC had something to do with their penises. It's such a weird dodge. The reality of it is Warren needed cash. And in pursuit of needing cash to remain in the race to do the job that she was there to do, which was hit Sanders in the knees, she needed a vehicle whereby she can get that cash. The super PAC ended up being that vehicle. But instead of just saying that, I was broke, I needed money, and I wanted to stay in the race, this nonsense comes out. Just a dishonest dodge. Right now, Warren was asked about endorsing Sanders. She said, I think Sanders needs some time to himself to decide what he's going to do next. And she's focused on the coronavirus. Instead of just saying, look, I don't entirely agree with Sanders in the way that I said I agree with Sanders. Because whatever you want to think of Warren, if you don't believe me and you think I'm being too cynical in this process, what is absolutely true, exponentially true, is that her being in the race, using that super PAC, allowed Joe Biden to get a killing blow. Yes, Sanders should have ran this race in a different way. All that stuff is true. But under the guidelines that we have, she allowed Biden to give the killing blow. I guess I'm making the point to you that if indeed the left chose Sanders, if indeed, just based on the way he ran the election, and again, he never hit her, but the way he ran that election, he never hit her despite the fact that she was hitting him. It became very clear she wasn't going to win. She stayed in the race. She intentionally stayed in the race during Super Tuesday after the moderates consolidated. She stayed in to gut his numbers. She used that super PAC to do that. That allowed Biden to get that narrative to go forward after winning those states. I guess I'm making a point to you that I don't understand how this is not betrayal, especially when the entire premise of her particular campaign was big structural change. I am Bernie Sanders light. That's what I am. And use the left for cash and for votes. She used it on both. So the notion that Warren doesn't owe anybody anything, the notion that Warren can bail on this and people shouldn't feel some kind of way about it, I think that's utterly ludicrous. You should feel something about it, especially if you're one of those people that bought into the act, that bought into the grift, that maybe sent her cash, that thought she's working in tandem with the left, that no, she's doing her own thing in the campaign, but at the very least, she's working with Sanders in some way. Not so much. Not so much. That is literally betrayal. That's what that is. To turn around and endorse her for vice president or reward her, that is not what accountability looks like. In fact of the matter is you incentivize your own being taken advantage of, your own mistreatment, if you're okay with backing Warren after something like this. I don't care if she runs for dog catcher. She's not going to get my support, nor should she get yours. Bob, I have feelings about this. I'm really bothered by this notion that people are willing to push for Warren to get a VP spot for Joe Biden as if it's going to somehow get the lefty vote. I don't think it should get the lefty vote. I think this is kind of one of those accountability things. She didn't back you in 2016. She didn't back you in 2020. She showed herself to be a political actor in both situations. And then you're going to say, yeah, okay, she's a lefty. And despite her working in the context of the party to stop your guy and repudiating all of the things she had been saying in the entirety of the race, especially with that super PAC, and then to turn around and say, okay, we'll give her a pass, and now we want her to be VP. And lefties, the people who they're trying to get, who are pissed off at her for not working with Sanders, are going to turn around and be like, okay, yeah, let's do that. I don't buy it.
Yeah, let me just say a few things here before we turn to our first break on Political Misfits. Yeah, I mean, let me first say classic Sanders supporter here, just to focus in on Warren, huh, Jamarl?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
I'm being a little facetious there, but no, I think the one thing that needs to be remembered here is I think a lot, you said the "she persisted" meme that kind of came out around the time of the Great Resistance, as Americans will remember, of all the women and people supporting women on the Women's March the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated. Those people were people that hadn't necessarily engaged in politics at a deep level, but had some financial wealth, that wanted to be progressive, but weren't organizing with the Sanders of the world, not with direct actions of the world. And a lot of these people over those first 2 years who went out and protested every day without actually building political power, I think a lot of those people got behind Elizabeth Warren, and they basically stopped Sanders from being able to really kind of grow his momentum, because all of a sudden they injected themselves into the fight per se. But a lot of these people, and I'll be very direct in what I'm saying here, are just people that usually going to protest became kind of the cool, trendy, who can make the best sign thing, and let's brunch and talk about how much we care about the starving children of the world. And they weren't necessarily engaged in direct organizing before then. It caused a lot of tension across the United States. And I think that's where Elizabeth Warren found a lot of her support. And I don't think those supporters are going to be swayed by Elizabeth Warren. I think they were never Trumpers or anti-Donald Trump that really kind of rose up in the moment. And they picked Elizabeth Warren for a lot of good reasons on the surface that looked good. But at the end of the day, if people went from kind of centrist, I liked Obama a lot, but I want something more progressive, Dems, they're going to vote for Joe Biden regardless of what Elizabeth Warren says. And I think anybody that went from Joe Biden to Elizabeth Warren will easily go back regardless of what Warren says. And those people that Warren may even have some sway with, I think those people are so politically engaged already or so over the Democratic Party that they're not going to be swayed by anything Elizabeth Warren has to say at this point. I think those people in the Working Families Party or some of these grassroots organizers, they always do this stuff. They were looking for some help from the Democratic Party. They didn't get it from Sanders. They didn't feel like they got it from Warren. I don't think anything Warren has to say or Warren being the VP pick is going to change their minds on that. So I think there's a lot more to be discussed there in the second hour of the show. If you're wanting to call in, I know a lot of people are going to want to bite at the phrase I can't remember.
The title.
There you go. The shot at the title against Jamarl. Save it for the second hour. We'll talk about Tulsi Gabbard. We'll talk about Elizabeth Warren. We'll talk about what Sanders should do at a very pivotal point of his presidential campaign. Next, we're going to turn to the economics of the COVID-19 national and global pandemic we're facing. We're joined by John Ross live in the United Kingdom. We'll take a short break here on Political Misfits, live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's
a Tic Tac UFO, man. Just like the one the U.S. Navy caught on video in 2004, but only came clean about it last year.
No, I'm pretty sure it was a bird.
Whatever.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The Political Misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with Bob Schlehuber. And we've been discussing the severe economic impacts, or we will be discussing the severe economic impacts of the COVID-19 virus. In all my years, I have to be honest, I've never seen anything like this. California's Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered Californians to stay at home, essentially shutting down California as cases top over 1,000. New York is not that far behind, with projections have been revised upward, showing hospitals will reach capacity at approximately 3,000 cases by March 24th. Goldman Sachs is estimating that the next unemployment insurance claims for next week will rise from 281,000 to 2,225,000. That is astonishing. 9% of the working Americans, 14 million people, so far have been laid off as a result of the coronavirus. 1 in 4 has had their hours reduced. This is from Survey USA. And of course, just alongside the bad news, we also have good old profiteering. Drug companies have been caught increasing the prices of their drugs during the pandemic. And let's also be clear, not having vaccines or test kits is also profiteering. It's not profitable to make those items, so those items just aren't made in numbers. The most onerous story that dropped yesterday has to do with several senators that got an intelligence briefing on the coronavirus. Senator Richard Burr sold $628,001.7 million worth of stock in 33 separate transactions on a single day. This includes significant holdings in 2 hotel brands, an industry that has been decimated. This was the most stock he sold in a single day for the last 14 years. Mrs. Lohr, another senator, reported 27 stock sales worth millions of dollars starting January 24th, the very day that she tweeted about the Senate briefing on, wait for it, the coronavirus. There were a couple of additional senators implicated. Senator Dianne Feinstein and Enho also were implicated in stock sales, but the difference being there's a little bit more complication into it. The first 2 are pretty straightforward. To discuss, we're joined by author and economist John Ross, a senior fellow of the Chaiyang Institute at Renmin University of China. John, how's it going?
Somewhere between disastrous and catastrophic.
Oh, wow. That's that well, huh? That great. So let me listen to this for a moment. So this is Senator Leofer, and she went to get a briefing on the coronavirus. She gets the briefing on the coronavirus. She comes back, she sells her stock. But listen to what she's telling the public. Let's play the clip.
I wanted to give you an update on the coronavirus situation following a meeting today that we had in the Senate with the President, the Vice President, and Secretary Mnuchin. They shared with us some ways that they are approaching this situation as it unfolds. First of all, I want to commend this administration, the President, the Vice President, for leading such a strong response. Everything from travel bans, travel advisories, to screening that's underway that has really slowed this spreading to America. We talked in the meeting today about some additional responses that the administration is looking to take to make sure that consumers are protected, that we have all the medical testing that we need, and that the economy stays strong. The good news is the consumer is strong, the economy is strong, jobs are growing. Our president has done a fantastic job making sure that we're in the best position to manage through this situation. It's really important that we all take responsibility for washing our hands. I know I'm a frequent hand washer. I wash my hands even more now. I even wipe down my cell phone. Just taking common sense protections. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Now, she said the economy, again, put it in context, she gets a briefing on the coronavirus. She goes out and sells her stock. She goes in front of the public and makes a video saying the economy is strong, our country is strong, our jobs are growing. 9% of working Americans have been laid off. And in that briefing, she was given economic news, meaning they knew that this was going to hit the skids. Now, John, is this legal? This can't be legal.
Well, if it's not legal, it shouldn't be legal. I'm not an expert on the U.S. Legal system, but let me tell you the situation. There is only 2 cases in the history of the United States in which there have been mass deaths on U.S. soil. This was in the Civil War and in the so-called Spanish flu, although it had nothing to do with in flu in 1918. This is going to be the third. This is a once-in-a-century event. Unless very rapid steps are taken, which are not being taken at the present time in the US, tens or more probably hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to die. That's the situation. And this person is attempting to profit out of this. That's all that can be said about this situation. I couldn't even care about her, because the more important is what is going to happen to affecting millions of Americans, and it's going to result in tens of thousands of deaths if the United States is lucky.
Yeah, you know, the Spanish flu, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 100 million people died worldwide. I mean, there were more people that died in the Spanish flu than First War and Second War. And, you know, I'm curious, the disruption, though, maybe not necessarily that extreme loss of life. I agree with you. It is, you know, inaction is death. I mean, it's deadly at this point. And so I totally agree with you on that. The disruption to the country itself, especially from the standpoint of the economic areas, I mean, the number of job losses and everything else. How do countries recover after something like this, especially when it's something that's long and prolonged over a period of time?
Well, it doesn't have to be prolonged. I mean, it's going to be very severe in any country. But let's take the country which was taken with the first hit with this, which was in China. The peak of number of cases in China was on the 5th of February, which is 3,887. They've now got it down to zero. It took them 6 weeks and 1 day to get it down from the peak to zero. But the point is, they had to take incredible severe measures to do that. The economy took an incredible hit because they shut down everything. Therefore, industrial production fell by 11%, retail sales fell by 20%, investment fell by 25%. This is an enormous hit. But the reason was because they put people's lives before profit or before the economy. And that's not exactly what is being done in the US at the present time. You know, why the hell is they're having a shutdown in California, but what's going to happen in the rest of the country? It's going to rip through the rest of the country. The population...
Yeah, well, it's already ripping through California. I mean, and you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I guess the thing is, though, I mean, it's kind of to back the point up. I mean, they aren't necessarily taking these kind of aggressive actions in the United States, which means that this is going to get much worse before it gets better. We don't even have good visual coverage on how many cases we have because they haven't had test kits. And even the test kits they did have, they weren't necessarily able to use them effectively. So I guess in my head, this gets worse before it gets better in the situation. I mean, and even from where we are now in regards to the number of people who are losing their jobs and everything else, are there any issues with supply chains, with all of these people either not working, not having income in order to buy things, which means it's going to create this kind of feedback mechanism of these places shutting down? Is there any danger of us going without, meaning something breaking down when we don't necessarily have a resource? Or is that something that's just not an issue at this point?
No, what's going to happen is in order to have a mass shutdown, which is what was done in China, you've got to be able to supply people at home with food, money, and so on, and that takes a massive resource. And that's simply not being done in the United States. We know what's going to happen as a result of that. If somebody's at home with no money, no food, they're going to go out. A significant proportion of those people are going to be affected, and they're going to spread the virus. That's what's going to happen. It's not a question of you can order everybody to stay at home. That's fine. You can all stay in your home and take 2 meters away from everybody, which is what's the minimum medical requirement. But unless you've got food, unless you've got income, you can't do it. So therefore, you have to put in place a massive state system to supply people with these basic necessities, and that's not present in the United States. So therefore, the situation is going to be disastrous. If you take it in proportion to the population of China, the situation in the US, the population of China is about 4.3 times that of the US. You've got to have a situation in which already, in proportion to the population, the situation is twice as bad in the US as it is in China. It's going to get very, very, very much worse than that.
What does our society look like over long term? Because assume for the moment, assume the worst. And I'm not being cynical on that. It's more so, I mean, Gavin Newsom came out and said 56% of the people in California were going to come down with coronavirus. Now, with the numbers in California, and you go with, let's say, even a 2% casualty rate. And another thing, we, for the longest time, kept thinking of this as a quote unquote boomer illness. And you find out that 40% of the cases where people are in the hospital are like between 20 and 50. Meaning, you know, it's not just the elderly that is being overtly affected by this. I mean, it is hitting people all down the spectrum. Over a long period of time, with that many people being affected, what does our society look like over a period of time?
Quite horrible. I mean, it's not such a gigantic event. I don't want to try to speculate about what's happening, but I say, you know, the only two times in American history when large numbers of people have died on American soil was the Civil War and the so-called Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. I mean, okay, there was a traumatic effect in U.S. society, for example, because of the Vietnam War. There wasn't in the World War. In World War II, the United States considered it had been attacked and therefore had to defend itself. And there was a large number of deaths abroad, of course, but a traumatic psychological effect because the U.S. felt it had been attacked. In the Vietnam War, there was a traumatic effect in U.S. society because large numbers of people were dying abroad. American soldiers. This time, there's going to be many, 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 many deaths within the United States. So this is going to be a effect of which the U.S. has very, very rarely seen in society, and which I can't speculate about what is going to be the exact effect. I just know it's going to be enormous.
John, I am really curious. I think of the phrase right now, never let a crisis go to waste. Those people out there that are looking for a different society that's not hinged on capitalism, on neoliberalism, on corporations run amok, right now, more than ever, we're seeing the failure of capitalism, of corporations. Corporations that have contracts to feed seniors right now are crippling. They don't know how to get food to people, or they don't know how to do it safely. We do not have a society that's based on care, on redistribution of basic needs for people. And we're seeing in this time, in this crisis, we're seeing society slowly orient itself to have to actually meet the needs of the most vulnerable. At least we'll see if it does or not. And obviously we'll talk more about how the checks and the money that the federal government's talking about getting down to people, how that happens whatsoever, because I have no answer to that. But right now, it seems like if you were ever to have a moment where you dramatically reoriented a society and an economic system, it would be right now. So I'm also really fascinated by these informal supply chains that are also quickly popping up around Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital here to distribute goods. I'm curious, John, how people that are looking for that alternative, what can they be watching for right now? What can they be encouraging for right now? And where can we find that silver lining of maybe actually starting to address some of the failures of capitalism in this moment?
I don't want to speculate. I mean, the last time that there has been such a traumatic experience, Western society, in the Vietnam War, which changed the lives of hundreds of millions of people in the West, including in the United States, including somebody like myself. This is the defining moment in my life so far up to the Vietnam War. This is on the same scale and may possibly be very much greater. It is going to lead to virtually the whole population of the United States and the whole population of the West reconsidering what is their view of the world. I can't speculate because it's too big. 1968 and the defeat of the United States in the Tet Offensive in 1968 transformed the entire situation in the world, and it transformed the entire psychology of the United States. What you're living through now is the same thing. It's going to be on this scale.
So then, John, let me ask you if you're wanting to avoid speculation, what's happened in China over the last 8-10 weeks? I mean, are they rethinking some of their basic supply chains, how people orient themselves? Is there a new conversation coming out of China now that they're at least able to dramatically slow the spread of the virus?
No, China, the situation is they've had a gigantic success. The peak of the number of daily cases in China was on the 5th of February, and it's now been slowed down to 0 domestic transmissions with 6 weeks. It showed the huge success of what has happened in China, and what is happening in the West is a disaster in comparison. I was reading an article today on what website called Guangzhou, which means Observer Network, which is one of the most important websites in China. It says the United States needs the help of China and it's turned it down. In China, what has happened is a massive vindication of their system compared to the situation in the West. In China, it got the situation down from the peak of the number of cases down to 0 domestic cases in 6 weeks and 1 day. In the US, on the contrary, it's completely out of control. What has happened is,
but I guess I hear that
sense of the huge vindication of what they've been doing.
What I guess their economy, obviously, like you said, major cuts across the board. They took the economic hit for the the health and well-being of its citizens. Fingers crossed that somehow that happens here in the United States. Not holding my breath on that, but obviously big hits on their economy as well as their global supply chain. I got to imagine the relation and trade to the United States is dramatically down. What will that mean for the Chinese economy as it comes out of this? Is it more domestic consumption and production? Is it shifting away from debt borrowing to the United States? What will this mean for the Chinese economy?
The first indexes which have come out, which are obviously on domestic supply, are seeing a rebound in March from February. The February figures are disastrous, there's no doubt about it. But they're recovering, yeah. It will switch more into domestic demand, more into domestic consumption, more into domestic investment, etc. But yeah, the Chinese economy is recovering from this already, whereas the hit in the United States is much worse. And it's all the question of how quickly can you get this under control. In China, it took, I say, from the peak to the worst period, 6 weeks. Okay, add on, because there will inevitably be disruption and so on when you return to work. So let's say 3 to 4 months, that will be got under control and the economy will begin to recover. But in the US, there's no sign of recovery. It's going to take months and months and months and months, which means enormous numbers of Americans are going to lose their jobs and there's going to be a huge economic hit. It's much better, even from the economic point of view, which is not the most important, to take the very, very, very severe hit in the short term by shutting everything down, which is what's done in China, then trying to keep the economy, which is really profits, going inside of the United States. So this is going to be a big hit. I was astonished. The New York Times, which has been carried out just anti-China propaganda for the last days, I was very surprised to see an article today which said for the first time, very honestly, that if you look back at it, China's performance during the coronavirus crisis is very much better than the US. If that's getting through to the New York Times, it'll get through to the American population.
Yeah, they were rational actors in the way they went about it. I mean, we played politics when you could clearly see something was going on. You could look at what the Chinese were doing in regards to their reactions. I mean, building a hospital over the course of like 10 days, it was astonishing feat to get across a certain degree of severity in regards to what was going on. And we still didn't prepare. It hit us, and we just kind of acted as if this wasn't that big of a deal. And now we're dealing with the consequences of that. I'm curious, this is because of the way China has handled this, and even they've been sending their doctors across the world. I mean, they've been helping in Iraq, they've been helping in Europe with supplies and whatnot. This kind of gets across maybe a defect in our system. I don't know if we're going to interrogate it in those terms, but the difference between building something for the sake of doing it as opposed to doing it entirely for profit, meaning because of the way we've organized our society, we were incapable of dealing with this particular issue. Based on what took place in the Spanish flu and those type of epidemics, did it create a situation going forward that the people saw themselves in their role of government and government action within a context of how it intrudes in society in a different way? Meaning, were those people able to look at government as being something more? Because right now we have a tendency to look at things as kind of rugged individualism. But right now, even conservatives are saying the government should supply the medications and provide the treatments for this particular issue. So do people going forward after an epidemic look at the government in a fundamentally different way than they did going into it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea that individuals can deal with this is completely ridiculous. I mean, all that an so-called rugged individual can do is cut themselves off from the rest of society. But if they're going to get the disease, they need the help of the health system and the doctors and nurses and so on and so forth. So therefore, it's a total challenge to what is happening. I mean, if you take my country, Britain, people are saying that the Conservative government is introducing radical socialist measures, but it's not actually.
Yeah, Boris Johnson. Yeah, Boris Johnson, that radical socialist over there. Yeah, I agree with you. You would think that society itself and just the needs of the society would hold sway a little bit more than this kind of, looking towards profit or just playing politics with it. I mean, this is somewhat of a radically departure from anything else that I've come across. In the Spanish flu, this affected the world, kind of in the same way it affected the world now. What was the impact on it from a standpoint of world economic output? I mean, I know that's not the most important thing, so I'm not asking in those terms. I'm asking more so because we have an interconnected world right now. And when China took the hit, it wasn't just China, it was pretty much everywhere else over the world. But right now, we have in Europe, the United States, it seems like there are certain parts at this point of Africa that are also getting hit. This seems to be worldwide. So with this kind of depression that hits because people aren't able to work or aren't able to buy things, what happens to the global economy in this sense?
It's going to take a tremendous downturn. The question is, you can't separate the economic features from medical features. If you can get the economic features, to get the medical features under control, you have to get the economic ones also. At the present time, if people are not going to go to work if they think they're going to die. Therefore, you've got a tremendous hit to the supply side of the economy because people are not going to go into work. Now, if you can, let's take the situation in China, taking it down from the peak to 0 domestic cases in 6 weeks. Okay, but people, they're not going to go to work the day after that's hit. So let's say 8-9 weeks from the peak to go back to work. Okay, the economy will take a hit, but we'll begin to recover. But if the pandemic continues to spread in the United States for months, which is what is happening at the present time, the economy is going to suffer a devastating blow to the situation. It's illustrating that really the economy of people, except in the United States and in Britain and other European countries, the priority is being put upside down. They're trying to protect the economy, as a result of which they're going to devastate people. For example, in Britain, where I happened to be by chance when the pandemic broke out, I was in Britain, not in China. you've got a pub, one of the most popular pub chains, Weatherstone's, right? They say that the staff are putting out desperate messages. They're saying we're not allowed to protect ourselves against people. We're not allowed to wear masks. We're not allowed to socially distance our people. We can't protect ourselves against this virus. And there are people still coming in here who are, spreading the virus. This is going to kill a lot of the employees in these pubs. This is the situation which is confronted. This is not a game. This is not us even seeing the people killed in Vietnam as in America. This is loads and loads of people are going to die as a result of this. And this is going to have an immense impact in the United States and every country in the world.
That is John Ross, a senior fellow at Chongyang Institute at Redmond, University of China, talking about how we so often put profit over people, and we're seeing it in a very, very real and scary way. John, thank you so much for joining us here on Political Misfits. We're going to take a quick break before coming back with more. We're live in Washington, D.C., and we're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, live in Washington, D.C. We continue to join remotely. Jamarl, I miss your face.
You miss my face? Well, I appreciate that, Bob. I can appreciate that.
I miss your face in 3D. I have photos of you, I guess. So if I did need to see you, worst came to worst. But I miss your 3D self. Let me say that.
You can stalk my Facebook or my Instagram page.
I still need you in person, so we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. It looks like other states here are following the guidelines. We talked a lot about the shutdown, the stay-in-place order there by Governor Gavin Newsom in California on Thursday, ordering all Californians, around 40 million of them, to stay in their houses as much as possible in the coming weeks. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, has also followed suit. Seems kind of a lighter order, but basically the same thing. Non-essential, do not go where you can have to. Essential workers, grocery stores, medicine is about all people will be able to travel to, which is quite interesting. It seems like in California, there's been some threats by officers to fine people up to $400. I'm seeing in one report if they are standing closer than 6 feet. I guess the police will just turn into high school dance chaperones, measuring off to 6 feet when they find them along the street. Newsom made the announcement there in California, in Sacramento, and said he thought up to 56% of Californians, that's more than 25 million people, could be infected over 8 weeks. Newsom said, I think it's time I tell you what I tell my family. This is not a permanent state. This is a moment in time. We will look back at these decisions as pivotal. Seems like he was also telling his family one thing and maybe the public another thing. At least it wasn't his stockbrokers, and maybe it was just his family. Here in the nation's capital, there has not yet been an official stay-in-place order yet. It'll be interesting to see if one does get enforced, as people, I can tell you, Jamarl, are not staying in place. I think the most egregious thing I saw of the not stay in place was an 11-on-11 soccer game taking place just down the street from me. So people either not taking this serious or just need to live and continue to play, I guess, until they die. One thing, though, Jamarl, that the police have been able to do is issue and basically operate low-level buy and bust deals. The Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C., the Narcotics and Special Investigation Divisions, along with Human Trafficking Divisions, are still conducting buy and bust operations. We can see this from the arrest records that were reported in Washington, D.C. on a daily basis. So I'm not really quite sure, Jamarl, what they're thinking. If they're supposed to stay 6 feet away from each other, why are they actually going up and engaging with citizens? I understand that policing will police and cops are going to be cops regardless. But in Washington, D.C., now get this, Jamarl, 141 D.C. firefighters and 70 police officers are under quarantine now.
No way. That many.
DC has a huge police force. I mean, that's about 4,000. But if you're already at 70, imagine what that's going to rise up to. And if you have to have a 14-day quarantine, as long as we don't have testing, I think that's the biggest kind of crux here is if there's some type of rapid testing, you can maybe start pulling people out of quarantine quicker than the 14 days. The 14 days is how long you might show symptoms for. But at least if people could test, they'll know whether or not they may need the full 2 weeks of quarantine. But the fact, Jamarl, to me, it's just crazy that you're still doing buy and bust type of stops. You have to engage with the person. You have to talk closely with them. You have to exchange something. Then you're saying, let's arrest them. And we're hearing reports now from Rikers as well as other jails across the country that don't have proper soap. You're also having different prisoners that are been sick, influenza outbreaks in the past. It just seems absurd to me that you would basically on so many levels still be doing these type of interactions with citizens as the police force.
You know, it's weird. This goes to that thing of being a person, like between being a cop versus being a human being. Being a human being is the real thing. I mean, you know, we can come up to some conclusion about, you know, what it means to be a human. But at the end of the day, you're a biological being. But that cop ignores that and still remains a cop. So instead of, you know, a good sense from the standpoint of order of concerns, busting somebody for selling pot is not necessarily the highest order of concern in the middle of a pandemic when it seems like these guys not just contract it, but potentially spread it just because of the way they're engaging in the population. If there's somebody who's, you know, murdered somebody or whacked somebody, fair enough. But drug buys, poor use of time.
Yeah, you'd think it would be a time for policing to slow down a little bit. It is quite interesting here to see the police out on the streets around Columbia Heights, Ward 1, Washington, D.C., one of the more impoverished neighborhoods, one of the more rapidly gentrified neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., tons of wealth right next to and mixed in with incredible poverty that you see a lot of these police cars basically stationed every 2 or 3 blocks up major corridors with their lights flashing. And so it is kind of a military tactic you rarely see. You see it in other countries. A lot of people pointing to the Metropolitan Police Department's relationship with the Israeli Defense Forces. A big tactic coming out of the IDF is this kind of increased presence by using your police lights in non-emergency moments to basically set up different patrols and stakeouts. So whatever you think about policing right now, it is going to be a heightened tension as more and more places put in stay-in-place orders. Jamarl, I also want to talk a little bit about what the U.S. military is up to in regards to the coronavirus outbreak. It says here, due to the COVID-19, the U.S. Army's major division-level exercise in Europe would be significantly scaled back. The exercise was called Defender Europe. I always want to be the person who gets to name these different military operations. But Defender Europe was slated to be the 3rd largest military exercise on the continent since the Cold War. It was meant to test the U.S. Army's ability to deliver a force from forts to ports in the United States and onward to ports in Europe. So how do you get American soldiers on U.S. bases to U.S. ports, and then how do you get them to Europe? And from there, operational areas throughout Europe, from Germany to Poland to the Baltic states and other Eastern European nations, Nordic countries, and even Georgia. So yes, Jamarl, NATO is still alive and well and was preparing this major practice exercise. But as COVID-19 has spread across the globe, with Europe designated as the newest epicenter of the virus, the Army decided last week that it would scale back Defender Europe, according to a statement from the U.S. Army. much was riding on Defender Europe, Jamarl, when it comes to teaching the Army where it stands in terms of its ability to rapidly deploy a combat credible force to Europe in support of NATO and the U.S. National Defense Strategy. The exercise was also going to help the Army get more clarity on its multi-domain operations concept as it morphs into official doctrine. It's bizarre to me. It's like we have everything set up to rapidly deliver military and weapons around the world, but when it comes to health supplies, no, we can't. No, not so much. And so, Jamal,
how bizarre is that? How bizarre is that?
I hate to say this, especially when I know things are going to get much worse. And even if you have a rosy-colored, optimistic lens, things are still going to get worse. We're still having a lack of testing. We still have so much to address still. That's not going to happen. But if it's not too early, Jamarl, can I say one silver lining from all of this is the slowing of global imperialism and war making. And it's really slowing the U.S. military's carbon footprint. I think you probably saw that image that a lot of people did in China about the air pollution. A matter of like a week, it was so dramatically different. The United States was going to run the largest exercise on the one of the largest exercises, military exercises ever in Europe. That's not going to happen. You know how many ships, how many planes, how many barrels of oil were going to get burned and polluted the country. And so maybe the silver lining is that our planet gets a half a day off here just to rest.
Pretty much, yeah. God, man, our reality is so super weird. I mean, you know, for the amount of money that it costs to get weapons in space, to get these nuclear weapons, to refine your nuclear weapons, to get your hypersonic missiles, to get your boats, your ships, all of that money, all of the resources that go into that, as opposed to, you know, trying to come up with some kind of peace corps. Like, you know, it's between the two, the death, the life, the limb, and all of that stuff from a human standpoint, not from a capitalist standpoint. From a capitalist standpoint, I get it. The goal is to maximize profit, meaning selling those bombs and boats and ships. So you pay politicians to be more belligerent. You also pay them to knock down other governments so you can get your hands on the resources. I get it. It's a sick incentive. But from the human being standpoint, you know, you would think that war would be the situation where you would prefer least. And that looks like that would be the situation where you would have more emphasis on this notion of peace and, you know, building relationships. Not so much. It's the opposite.
Yeah. And if you want another kind of upside down world moment, some are speculating that the COVID-19 quarantines and slowdown will actually slow the U.S. troop withdrawal that was supposed to slowly be taking place in Afghanistan over the next month. Military Times has confirmed from 4 U.S. sources on the ground in Afghanistan that there are 14-day quarantine periods imposed at Bagram Air Force Base and Kandahar Airfield. Interesting how when the U.S. allegedly goes to move troops from Afghanistan, they can't. You know, it's like we wanted to leave. We were going to leave.
But Corona, man. That coronavirus, dog.
I guess we'll just increase the numbers while we're here. I mean, truly remarkable times there in Afghanistan and just continued global spread. Obviously, our mind on Italy, on Iran, all those here in the United States, and what this impact will have on U.S. Military people. The Peace Corps there that you had briefly mentioned, Jamarl, I think they have roughly about 7,000 to 8,000 volunteers around the world that have all been recalled back to the United States. And so when we talked to John Ross there, talking about how it's not like everything just is one day, everything's just pop back and fixed every day. Everything, if eventually when it's turned back on, it's going to take a lot of time to get those supply chains back up and running, people back into place if they're international workers or domestic migrant workers here in the United States. This is going to be a long, long process before anything is fixed. So it'll be quite interesting to see how this continues to play out over the next few weeks. Well, Jamarl, that's our first hour of the show here on Political Misfits. I think a lot of us are getting a little stir crazy. I think a lot of us are getting a little anxious still. So what would be better than spending our next hour debating with one another?
Come at me, bro.
Democratic president. Let's do it. 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Both of us are locked down right now, coming from you remotely, but we are still ever present. So let's keep going against the grain. Earlier, we discussed the rather apocalyptic economic impacts that we're just beginning to experience due to the coronavirus. This is literally a job the government, the social safety net, is supposed to be there in order to accommodate. Mitch McConnell put out a plan yesterday, regressive, shocking nonetheless, that a Republican is offering a UBI. I mean, I got to be honest, my expectations for Republicans are so low that I was actually shocked that the Republican Party was putting anything forward, credibly anything forward, to even attempt to deal with it. Well, in this case, it speaks of how bad the situation is. They're pushing for $1,200 check per person, phased out starting at $75,000 income, lowered $5 for each extra $100, add $500 per child, additional money, no money for incomes over $99,000, and based on the 2018 tax returns. Now, there are other parts to this because there's a large corporate section where there's also a giveaway to corporations. Predictably, Pelosi and Schumer didn't like this, calling the plan too pro-corporate. Now, Democratic leadership has been getting hammered recently with the Trump administration on this very specific issue. The Trump administration, in an odd way, has outflanked the Democratic Party on the issue of UBIs. Basically, the Trump administration wanted to send checks. They wanted to get the money into the hands of Americans pretty quickly. They went from looking at this as basically, oh, there's not much an issue here, everybody should calm down, to we're at war, we're on a war footing. Well, in this case, he's trying to push the checks out. I suspect he strongly understands that his ability to get reelected is going to depend on how he handles this particular issue. And in this case, they've opened up the financial gates. Pelosi and Schumer didn't like this idea of giving people $1,000 or so per month because they wanted the idea to be means tested, meaning the Trump administration ended up being a tick to the left of Pelosi and Schumer on this issue. That is so, so sad. Of course, Sanders has led on this particular issue. He's tried to cover all healthcare costs, use the Defense Production Act to dramatically scale up domestic resources, bring in the National Guard and Army Corps of Engineers, provide $2,000 to every person in the crisis, expand unemployment, guarantee no one goes hungry, waive all student loan payments. Now, Maxine Waters has a plan that's similar to Sanders and has many of the provisions that Sanders has in his bill. The Progressive Caucus is laying out their ask: $2,000 cash payment, add an additional $1,000 for families with a kid, expanded sick leave. They're also pushing for emergency rental assistance for low-income renters, no bailouts or buybacks for executive compensation, and also put a pause on foreclosures and evictions. The Trump administration has also put out this notion of getting rid of evictions, but the problem is it doesn't necessarily apply to people who are renting, like an apartment. Both groups are trying to do something. And I guess you're going to find this kind of weird comparison between the two. The Democratic Party, I would imagine, at some point, if they're paying attention to the left flank, is going to end up further to the left. The Republican Party is going to end up further to the right. And somewhere along the way, you're going to find something in the middle that these guys end up with. That gets across how devastating of a time that we have, that they are literally willing to send people cash in order to keep those people afloat, realizing that the economy is going to hit the skids. Part of that is our unpreparedness. Another part of it is ideology, but we are hitting the skids. We have a guest with us, Mondale Robinson, founder of the Black Male Voter Project. Mondale, what's going on, man?
What's up, gentlemen? How are you all?
We're doing all right. We're doing all right. So this is an unprecedented situation, at least in the context of my lifetime. I have been stuck at home, going a bit stir crazy, especially since I've gotten accustomed to going into the office. And, I would imagine my co-hosts are probably feeling somewhat of the same way, and this is going to go on for the next months, potentially. This has real concerns for people who don't have jobs where they can work remotely, who have kids who potentially aren't in school, not to mention for all of the jobs that have just been lost. They have to do something. The Republican plan comes across to me as being not enough. And if I'm being honest, you can even make a case that some of the Democratic plans to 2000 may not necessarily be enough, especially if people are living off of higher incomes. Do you think that these guys are actually going to be able to pass something like this? I mean, a UBI is a dramatic departure from what we've typically done. And do you think going forward, by passing something like a UBI, that it cracks the consciousness of the nation on this issue? Kind of like Obamacare, where people was like, oh, no one can ever have universal health care. And it's like, well, Obamacare is not universal health care. However, it is getting across something that the country can do something that for 30, 40 years they said wasn't possible. I guess I'm asking, that led a pathway for the people to be more willing to accept Medicare for all. Is the UBI for something like this going to lead a pathway for the public to be maybe willing to accept something like this just going forward?
Yeah, I think for the most part, this is going to be it's going to be remembrance of something about Obama, but not Obamacare, more like his bailout for big business after the housing crisis. I don't have faith in anyone in the Congress right now as it pertains to ensuring that people are taken care of more than businesses. I do believe Trump at the helm of this, Trump signing his name on something, Trump will make it whatever Trump wanted it to be. So I'm not excited about people's conscience being cracked because of this, simply because the person who's going to be talking about this will never frame it in that context, and the idea that we can say whatever we want to about it. Trump microphone, his bully pit is bigger and larger, and people will hear him tell him whatever lie he wanted to be, and 45% of the country will automatically believe it, even though they receive benefits that remind you of it. So I'm not excited about, one, the shortness of the plan. People being excited about payroll tax cuts are ridiculous to me, simply because my thoughts about the importance of Social Security, and that we pay for Social Security with payroll taxes. So this just sounds like a way for Republicans to reamp something that they wanted when Bush was president, which is privatizing Social Security. This seems like a sneaky way to get that. I'm not excited about that. And the fact that $2,000 is not going to do anything, I won't say anything. It's not going to do enough to ease anybody's pain. And I think your idea that we're going to be this way for a month is being extremely optimistic.
I say months with an S.
Oh, okay, with an S. Okay, great. That's
well, I mean, just to be fair for a moment, I am not a big fan of Trump, not at all. By the same token, Trump definitely wants to get reelected. And if Trump botches this, Trump will not get reelected, because his main claim to fame, oh, look at the stock market, as if the stock market is some indication of what the economy is, meaning the real economy.
Jamarl, I feel like you keep saying this, like, if Trump botches this, wasn't the whole we're in a national emergency, hasn't it already been botched?
No, you missed what I mean. What I mean by this is Donald Trump is taking a different tact. He's moved from this thing of, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I agree with you. I've said on more than one occasion Trump has botched dealing with this particular issue. I'm talking about from the standpoint of the way the public perceives what's taking place now, and they see Trump coming out with this kind of big bully pulpit saying, let's give people money and let's watch me take control. I'm telling you, if you look at the polling on this, there are more people that think Trump is actually doing a good job than not.
That's what I'm saying. I guess my thing is why I think, one, I don't see any Democratic leadership right now offering. I mean, Kamala Harris, who some people are saying will be Joe Biden's VP, that her $500 a month, she had that well before the crisis. So in a time of crisis, just like say $1,000 a month, lady, like I don't think that matters whatsoever. So I'm not seeing any leadership out of them. But again, if it's going to come down to, does Donald Trump do political scoring on his response? And I think that's what he's trying to do. So if you're the opposition, I don't think you try to fight him on, oh, well, he should have done $1,000 instead of $2,000, or getting into the weeds on what he does now. I think you're just trying to encourage him. I think in the long term, people are going to have to heavily focus on this was all avoidable and try to ding him there, because I think, like you're saying, they're not going to be able to beat him on like the response at this point. I think he is going to try to use the bully pulpit and try to spin it however they want. But how many people, I think the win is trying to say, look, this stuff was completely avoidable. And so that's where I guess more of my oppositional thought. I think that people are going to quickly forget that this was all avoidable and just overly focus on like this, which is important, the solutions right now. But I think we also keep in mind this was avoidable. Like, this didn't have to happen.
No, I agree with you, but that's exactly what's going to happen. That's kind of my point, right? I mean, if Trump, look, I've said it before, if Trump passes some kind of bill where he's giving people cash, like $1,000, whatever, and this notion that $2,000 wouldn't be a big help is ludicrous. And my mom barely would bring home $2,000 when she was raising me. $2,000 is a big deal, especially if you're not getting anything. Put that in context. Having $2,000, you get rid of evictions or dispossessions and whatnot. Yeah, that's a big deal. That makes a really big difference in a person's life as compared to either losing their job, not having anything, not being able to get unemployment benefits. I wouldn't necessarily poo-poo that as if it's nothing. On the flip side of that, look, I agree with you about the tax cut stuff. You know, this notion that Republicans like to do this thing of, okay, we're going to give these massive tax cuts and we're going to give you $2 back. Yeah, that's scam. So I totally agree with you on that point.
Let me be clear.
Mondale.
Yeah, let me be clear. $2,000 is not small fries to people struggling. Okay, it is small fries to what they're gonna go through. So this immediate reaction to Trump saying to the public that he's gonna give this money to the people has bumped him in one poll. But that poll, he's still, within the margin of error of being not majority of Americans. Plus 512 people were polled. We don't know what state they were in. So I'm not really by one poll, and that poll is from this week. So let's not do that. Unless you really want to start, come at me, bro, early, because that's ridiculous.
I think what's going to happen, though, I hear you, Mondale. I think there's a few things that I think $2,000 to somebody who is struggling, or the unemployment benefit that's more than unemployment benefits get to most people. So a lot of people, if they're able to get these checks, will get some reprieve. And if the supply chains and the grocery stores stay open, I think that will make a big difference. On one side of things, my biggest worry is, and Mondale, you work with a lot of folks like this, they don't have mailing addresses, they don't have permanent homes, they don't have credit cards or bank accounts. They may not even get a check, but where do you go cash it, kind of thing. I think we have a lot of the populace, and it'll be really interesting to see if local governments and organizations can reach those people and support them and get them those monies. If you're just the young 20-something-year-old kid who's not tapped into what's happening right now, and you're put out of work at a low-income job, where are you getting your money? And if you don't get that money right away, people are going to get really angry and show that frustration in a myriad ways. My other thing that I think would be interesting is, I don't know, somebody like my mom who does follow politics, she has a sense of what's going on. She sees Trump as bad. I never had really heard her frustration with Donald Trump until this moment of like, wait a second, this is, because it's actually hitting a lot. It's hitting a lot of middle class retiree white people who vote Democrat but aren't necessarily aggressive, where they're calling anybody that they know are Republicans or know that are Trump people. They'll kind of just stay quiet and say, I don't agree with that at a lunch with the Trump person. I think you're going to see a sea change with those type of people really kind of uptick their frustration towards Donald Trump over the next few months. And it might not necessarily lead to a change at the ballot box in this next election, but just the general sentiment of people staying quiet on him. I think more and more people are going to start showing that frustration.
Also, I mean, we got to admit, like, point, Bob, this check is for the working poor or the middle class. It's not for the poor people. So many poor people are going to be left behind. They think they're going to get some of this $2,000 when they're not just because they don't have addresses or they don't have ways of cashing the check, but for a myriad of other issues that poor people go through when it comes to applying for government subsidies or whatever we want to call this. I will also say that imagine how many Latino brothers and sisters that are not going to not going to cash this check or even willing to sign up for this check because they have family members that are potentially, or not documented. And then, you have ICE still out here doing raids. People aren't, this is not a check for the mass. This is a check for, people that are working and willing to sign up for a system. I know so many people that will not benefit one bit from this. I know people that will not risk a family member's life or status for $2,000. So when I say $2,000 is not a big deal, I'm saying in this grand scheme of COVID-19, this is not how we address this problem. It's not how we're gonna fix it. Right now, people are excited about what it will be. When people realize that it was for a select few, not only the excitement or the lack of excitement about COVID, people will be tuned in more to Donald Trump simply because they're at home more people watching the news. You have people frustrated because they didn't get the $2,000. You also have people that were never going to get the $2,000 watching more news because of COVID-19 and more time in the house. TV viewership has went up. I don't see how Trump benefits from this. The more you listen to Trump, the more ridiculous he sounds to you. Him calling this the Chinese virus and insisting on doing that to play to racist Republicans, people will see this as what it is. And Trump is participating, ensuring that his friends, Wall Street and all these other businesses are taken care of while poor people suffer and are at a greater risk of being, gravely ill or dead from coronavirus. The Trump's administration.
But
Jamarl,
if a Democratic president was in, a Democratic president will be doing the exact same thing.
I disagree. 100%.
You don't believe that a Democratic president, Obama gave 80% of Bush's tax cut to corporations when he, enshrined 80% of those tax cuts into law. If Hillary Clinton won that race, she was also going to give a tax cut. It might not have been as onerous as Donald Trump, but she would have did it. He threw his body to protect the banks while letting homeowners go bust. And you're telling me that you don't believe that if a Democratic president was in office, that Democratic president would also be trying to protect these various industries as opposed to helping homeowners?
I don't go back in history, and you're not going to get me to defend Obama. It's not that type of Friday. What I will say, a Democratic president in 2021, walking into the White House in 2021, would not be able to do what Obama did in 2008, simply because of the demands of the people of that party, the base of that party, what it would cost that president, and a Democratic Congress would not approve it. Not with those that are the progressive wing of the party right now. They would revolt. It wouldn't happen. Beyond that, both candidates have talked about who should have been charged and locked up because of what happened in 2008. That's Joe Biden and also Bernie Sanders. And so I don't believe a Democratic president will be doing the same thing. On top of that, the way we talk about, the way we show up in the world, the way we work with partners would be completely different. So I don't believe a Democratic president would do the same thing in this climate.
No, I hear you. Yeah, you're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're not in studio. We're on the phone, but we're having a lively conversation. 202-521-1320. We'll do our best as a skinny team here we have in the studio. Big shout out to all the engineers continuing to work so we can bring you live shows every day. Try to give us a call. If they're able to answer, they will. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll talk a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, the latest from Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Mondale, I've been really interested. I kind of want to just go back here briefly about this need to actually see what people need. I think what I've been most striking here, and I've talked about this on the show the last week, is our seniors living in public housing. And this public housing we've documented on our show before: cockroaches, rats, bugs, doors closed to community spaces that the government won't give community members access to. And one of the biggest problems that people have right now is actually being able to assess the needs of these populations. A lot of people are afraid to go in and try to do an assessment and get what each house needs. Do you have toilet paper? Do you have toothbrushes and toothpaste? Or do you need your medicine picked up every Wednesday at a certain time at the local pharmacy? A lot of those need checks aren't being done, and it's almost too late in many ways, because the government should be doing this stuff all year round and simply have a database that says, hey, in a time of crisis, we know Mrs. Johnson needs her diabetes medicine on Tuesdays. We know Mr. Franklin also needs his whatever eye contact medicine on Thursday. None of that is there. And if we talk about socialism or redistribution of wealth and this idea of, well, who does it get redistributed to? We're kind of out there flying blind because we don't have an adequate needs assessment. One of the biggest issues facing us then is like, how do we actually see what people need and get that information right now? And so a lot of these questions you're asking, I guess I'm just trying to dig a little deeper in how we find solutions to them.
You're asking for a compassionate government. The United States is not a compassionate government. It never has been. Not in our life. The response usually it's always something catastrophic that usher in progressive change. It's not really politicians that do it. If you think about what happened after 1918, what happened at the Great Depression. All of these things usher in progressive changes and social safety nets. This crisis will force us to rethink a lot of things as governments. I also think it's going to force progressives to rethink how we go about getting things done. Unfortunately, what happens though is the party in power during these crises get to implement ideas that they had laying around. And like I said, the ideas that Republicans had laying around that we don't think is connected to anything we're talking about right now will become part of the conversation again, i.e. privatizing Social Security. So I don't think because Donald Trump's at the helm and the Senate's Mitch McConnell, who has no soul, are thinking about what we need to do to be able to track the least amongst us. No one is having a conversation about poor people. People, not even Democrats, they have a conversation about working people.
No.
There's a whole segment of the population that don't work that before the COVID-19, and those that were working poor. I mean, 2 and 3 jobs that were below minimum wage because they're both jobs of waiting tables at different restaurants or different bars. So I don't mind this conversation about the working poor because these folks should be taken care of. We should have a safety net for them. I am also very depressed at the fact that we have no conversation about the poor and there's nowhere to begin except at the bottom because we have nothing in place to protect these folks at all.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Jamarl,
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Jamarl.
Agree with me.
I just wanted to share a quick anecdote, Jamarl. I mean, I was here in my in Ward 1 of Washington D.C. and I had gone and met with who directs this woman at Thrive, and a big shout out if anybody in Washington D.C. or anybody out there listening wants to support an amazing organization, Thrive DC. You can learn more about them, but they're a homeless shelter. They do food services, they do mental and physical health, they do showers, they do clothing, they do legal services. About 200 clients a day, housing insecure folks. And to Mondale's point, these people are poor. They're not even working poor. These people just aren't working, basically getting their services. That center will now be closed starting on Saturday by DC government. So you wonder who's going to go. Where are those people going to go? Obviously, there's different sites across the city, but people don't have cars to get to those sites. People don't have the information and education to know to even go to those different sites. But about 2 years ago, Jamarl, our council seat was up, and I went and met with this woman. I said, well, tell me more about your services. And I said, out of the 4 people running for the seat, how many of them have actually come and talked to you? And 0 of them, Jamarl, 0 of them had came and talked to the person who was running the only shelter wraparound services for homeless people, for poor people. Not a single one came to her. And it gets to Mondale's point. For me, why do you run for office if not to serve the least amongst you? Why would you not run for office when you said, look, I looked at the least amongst us, the poor in our community, and I said, those people aren't getting adequate services, so I'm going to run. These people that run for these offices, Jamarl, and so many seats across America could care less about the poor. They're not even inquiring or asking questions. And for me, that's the most disgusting thing about American democracy right now.
Well, unfortunately, democracy and capitalism are 2 different things. And many a times the people who get into those positions, it's not a situation where they're, look, as lefties, we orient ourselves to the world in a certain way. But that's not necessarily an absolute. And there's no God to kind of enforce one opinion or the other. You're just stuck with relative perspectives. Unfortunately, because we don't tend to hold our political leaders accountable in regards to what they're doing, you have this kind of gimmick of a 2-party system. They get into those offices almost as, this is my job. but not a job in the sense of actively using government for the best interest of the public. No, they get in oftentimes on the backs of wealth, not the poor. So if you're in this thing of dollars and pitchforks, and there are no pitchforks to be found anywhere, you have dollars. I mean, they lean in a logical way to the side that gives them the most cash. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. If you're a rational actor, even if you necessarily wasn't a horrible person, and you think, well, this is the way you do politics, you take incremental changes that doesn't necessarily trespass on my donors while talking this kind of big game. Also, from the standpoint of the public, we don't teach the public that. Like, think back to the things that you've learned in your life, or think back to the things, anybody learned. Most of those things are just small incremental changes from one time to another. And from the standpoint of what you're told, the things that your society kind of emphasizes or de-emphasizes. But there is no situation where, as you're growing up, you learn about government or government services or, this kind of strong arm into the electoral space. None of that stuff is there. That stuff you have to figure out on your own. And most people, I don't think, know about it.
So, Mondale, I wanted to ask you real quick before our break, and I'm pretty excited for this Come At Me, Bro segment today. We got Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, the future of Sanders. But Mondale, I wanted to ask you, how do you think we re-inject the idea of focusing on poor people and that organizing? I think a lot about somebody like, I think one of the things that Bernie Sanders just didn't have with him that would have put a little bit more momentum at his back was a larger Occupy-esque movement taking place, or something, a Black Lives Matter, some type of social movement, something like even if Reverend Barber's Moral Monday movement would have kind of grown. And I think a lot about Jesse Jackson, who had done that deep grassroots organizing for decades before he ran for president, that kind of gave him that support. I don't think Bernie Sanders kind of had that poor people's movement that was there kind of in parallel with his political movement. And I think that was missing. Where do we find the voice and the movement to actually bring poor people's needs back into the day-to-day consciousness of American people?
A couple of things. First of all, Bernie, it's impossible for Bernie to have that in that movement in his current state. And by his current state, I mean he continues to hire the same consultants, the same white guys who lack the ability to see their faults and also their shortcomings. And then he just piecemeal black folk as answers to problems in his campaign, and then not even talking to the black community. These are black people that white people like. So to move that way. Secondly, I will say this: that was not Williams Barber's Moral Monday movement. There's so many of us, thousands of us, that went down there every week, stayed longer than him, and also helped convene that and led organizations that were a part of that movement. He was just the NAACP president at the time, and then folk just allowed him to speak. That we need to say that, because a lot of the time, too many North Carolinians, those that were locked up, those of us this time stayed out there in the rain, long nights, long hours, stood out there screaming, lost our voice every week, and we're not national names. Those people are not national names, but there's definitely as much as theirs as it is. He just became the mouthpiece when MSNBC decided that they were going to interview him and not some of the other people. And then from there, people fell in love. So that's a personality thing. That one right there is part of the problem, not just for Dr. Barber and the Moral Monday movement, but for Bernie Sanders and the progressive movement as well. So Bernie lacked a lot of things, and it's partially because of the folk he's surrounded himself with. And I don't give him a pass on that, because in 2016 he might have got a pass. But he did the same thing with the same people in 2020, one, excluding black folk in a real way, not investing in the South in a real way, not having a real program to address shortcomings of his campaign, and letting black people know that it's comfortable and it's appropriate to support him and the policies he was fighting for. And the class argument is not an argument for black people, because if it was, it would be an argument for Latino people, but he spent 4 years building a relationship with Latino people and not black people. And that was his team telling him he needed to do that. And then to his detriment, I do believe the way that you build movements that include poor people is you start with poor people. You don't start with consultants in D.C. or other folk from outside of that demographic or those communities telling them what they need. So Bernie's movement lacked what it didn't include.
Jamarl Thomas, time it is.
Yeah, Come at me, bro. It's
Let's
that
do a
time.
quick break here on Political Misfits before we come back with one of our favorite segments of the week. Come at me, bro. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture. You hear that sound? It is Friday, the end of the week. Let's get ready to go against the grain with our Come At Me Bro segment. If you feel strong enough, if there's something that's on your chest, if there's something that you've been wanting to say or something to complain, whatever, feel free to call in and take your shots at Bob and I or our guests. So let's start here. The first conversation, and we can build up to the other conversations. What is the future of Sanders? Now, what should Sanders do now? Should Sanders drop out and back Biden, even if it looks like we might not even have a vote in November? How much does it really help Biden, honestly? And if Sanders did that, does it damage his prospects of creating a viable new left party with his movement? Now, the catch here is I don't think Sanders has it in him to create a new left party. I would like him to do that. That doesn't necessarily seem something that's on his agenda. So within the context of what seems to be on his agenda for the next X number of months, what should he do? I'm going to open this up to you two. What do you guys think? Bob?
You want me to go? You want to go first, Bob?
Bob. Go ahead, Mondale. You can go first.
I believe, listen.
Mondale?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead. You go first. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I feel like in order for Bernie to remain relevant beyond the folk that follow him regardless of what he's doing, Bernie needs to drop out sooner than later. I know people don't want to hear that. I know a lot of people that are my friends that I support don't want to hear that, but Bernie has no way of becoming a nominee. Him staying in right now does one thing, and that serves his ego. Bernie can negotiate whatever he's going to try to negotiate at this virtual convention that's probably going to take place in Milwaukee that won't take place, and just go ahead and get back to being a senator. And that's what Bernie's future is, him being a senator. And since Bernie, has a problem with the very rich, the top 1% of people, all that money that he has left over from his campaign, rather than doing what he did in 2016, where his people just created a bunch of new organizations that serve the people that was his mouthpieces. He should just give that money to, he should figure out a way to give that money to people that give work, that are in communities doing work to support these issues that he's fighting for and screaming for, and then he should go back and live out his days as a senator from Vermont, which is his future, and is always his lot in life.
So wait, okay, wait. So
wait, I thought
Sanders,
let me get in here.
Sanders beginning to run in 2016 and going into 2020, it became clear that he was going to run, and you can look at the policies of the Democratic Party under Clinton and Obama, the last two presidents. And you can compare those policies. If you ask, what does the Democratic Party stand for? I would argue it's those two. Sanders, within 4 years, drags the conversation of wages to $15 an hour, drags the conversation to Medicare for all to the point where literally every state, even states he lost by like 30 points, agree with the issue of Medicare for all, this notion of paying off student debt, and even this leading on the coronavirus issue. But you believe that he should have just buggered off in that situation. I guess I'm making the point to you that whatever he did in that last campaign and whatever he did in this campaign served the interest of dragging the conversation to the left in a way that hasn't taken place in the last 40 years. Is that true?
Absolutely not. But go ahead with your lie because you need to, because you're Bernie supporter. That's what y'all do.
Well, what did I say that was wrong?
Well, I guess where I get confused, Jamarl, is it is this kind of you're frustrated with Sanders. You thought he should have been a different candidate. You want him to go for the jugular. And you've been talking about that the last week or two. But yet every move he made after 2016, I don't feel like you're pulling far enough back where if he wasn't the candidate you wanted him to be the last few weeks or the last month, I don't think he was that candidate the last 4 years. And I think Sanders should stay in until the convention. He should stay in as long as possible. In the world and times we live in, who knows what happens with Joe Biden between now and then. So as a safety precaution, maybe it's not a bad idea for him to stay in. I think he does ultimately drop out, though. I think he isn't the candidate that we want him to be, where he goes for the jugular, where he points at Biden in that debate the other night. I still can't believe he talked about the influence of billionaires on the political system and talked about how they donated to the political system. And instead of pointing at Joe Biden, he hesitates and he just says to all of the people, basically, and it sounded like himself included. It was bizarre to me. I don't think Bernie Sanders wants to take on the Democratic Party. This whole idea that he wants to burn the party down, I think that was to scare people away from Sanders. I think Sanders will drop out. And that's been my frustration. I'll go back to post-Obama heading into the Sanders year. Sanders process, I wasn't with Sanders because I didn't believe in his foreign policy. And by the time that I was so against Hillary Clinton and willing maybe to think more about how I could support Sanders, he was out of the race. But by no means that I feel like after Sanders ran that he was going to somehow take on the Democratic Party. Nobody from our revolution was with me challenging the police chief or Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat who goes on to the establishment of all establishment politicians, basically a placeholder for developers here and big money people. Nobody from Bernie Sanders was there with me saying, yeah, let's organize against this. Nobody was helping take over the Green Party here as a legitimate oppositional party. So this idea that Sanders somehow did anything right out of 2016 when we're now criticizing him because he didn't win, I guess I'm confused, Jamarl, of when he was doing the right thing and you were cool with it, and then when he did the wrong thing and you've been frustrated with him. That switch to me is not really clear, and I don't think it's as easy as maybe I'm hearing it right now.
Well, there is no switch. I mean, a person is a complete package. It's not a thing where a person somehow is disconnected from his actions. I mean, if Sanders is composed in a particular way where he doesn't necessarily like going for the jugular, and he runs his campaign where he doesn't like to do attack ads and those type of things, those things are connected to just who he is. And so I've complained about him in the sense for years. I mean, this goes back to 2016, where, aggravated like nobody's business in the way that he does his campaigns. By the same token, there are aspects of it that I actually do like. This thing of trying to be above it all, but that's not politics. That's not the way you win all of your arguments. And so it's both. Both of those things just kind of exist together, where it's like, God, man, you need to throw a punch. You can't win a race like this. You can't win a race like this.
So come or go, where are you at on your own question? Does he stay in or should he drop out?
He should stay in. Now, he should stay in because, well, I don't know. I don't think he will. That's the catch. That's the catch. I think between the coronavirus and between everything else that's going on, he's probably going to pull out, but he shouldn't pull out. I mean, look, ultimately, Sanders, if Sanders gets what he wants, and by the way, I'm still interested in what did I say that you're taking issue with? Because you're trying to imply that I said something that was wrong or that I was being deceptive or dishonest. I don't have to be dishonest because I'm just right.
Lie. I heard the word lie. It's come at me, bro. No time for friends right now.
What's the thing that you believe that you're speculating that I said wrong because I'm so ravaged with Sanders that I'm just making stuff up?
I was coming. Bob tried to give you an easy out and let you discuss the conversation about the flip-flop you made between Bernie staying in or you being upset and loving Bernie at the same time. He's like McDonald's food for people with heartburn. Y'all love him and he burns your chest. That's the problem. What I'm talking about
That's a person. That's just a person. There is no such thing as perfect people. There are aspects of people who you can love, and there are aspects of people you can greatly dislike. That's called having complex relationships or complex emotional states when engaging and dealing with people. That's just being a person.
You're trying to burn the clock out. Let me give you the answer. Stop it. Everybody, and you that believe Bernie has pulled the party forward in the last 6 years or 8 years further than it's been in 2,000 years or since its inception. It's ridiculous. It's also ahistorical. It's like you guys forgot about John Edwards' campaign, who introduced the idea of universal health care and is the reason we even got Obamacare. This is not a Bernie thing. Stop it. Before Bernie, I think Cuba's been doing it since 72. So the idea that this is a Bernie thing is ridiculous. John Edwards also talked about universal.
Just so I'm clear, how long has Sanders been pushing for universal health care and Medicare for all?
John Edwards talked about college for everybody, and he created him and a North Carolina nonprofit in the state to pilot the program to show the world that it could work, or show this country that it could work. So stop acting like all this progress happened because of Bernie in a silo. You guys are tripping when you do that, and that's what.
A few points. I understand. A few points. So John Edwards was the one that was cheating on his wife that was dying of cancer, right? That's the person who. That's not John Edwards. Who's John Edwards?
No, that's out of bounds with what. That's why I don't think that's a good line of like. Let me retort. If you look at 1984 and Jesse Jackson's platform, he was as progressive, if not more, than where Bernie Sanders was in 2016. If you look at the state of Palestine, he was calling for a free state of Palestine. What I think Mondale's saying is that Bernie Sanders wasn't this like progressive
I'm asking
savior.
something different. I'm asking, is that the John Edwards who you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So why did you say no? It was
because
John.
I was trying to sideline a line of attack on beyond the policy point that you were bringing in his extramarital complex relationships with other humans that we all have.
I don't really need you to sideline whatever I'm saying in regards to my line of attack. That's the first point. On the second point, if that is the John Edwards that you're talking about, look, those ideas weren't accepted and integrated into the Democratic Party. And pretending that they were under some John Edwards is laughable. When Obama was in office, Obama was able to get through Obamacare. And good, I've given Obama props for that because I still think it cracked the consciousness of the nation in regards to healthcare. By the same token, the best that Obama was even talking about that he flaked on was a public option. Right now, the notion of Medicare for all was off the table. You couldn't even get them to talk about a public option. And right now, they're literally having this argument over Medicare for all where the majority of the public accepts it as true. I guess I'm making a point to you that, yeah, people could have said things in their past, fair enough, but there's a difference between saying something in your past and having those ideas actually incorporated into the base as something where there's a hegemonic shift or an Overton window shift in the context of the debate. Those are different. Yeah.
My point. I think you're giving too much credit to Sanders, and I think that the people who pushed him to run and the people that have been organizing with the Jesse Jacksons of the world, other people, I think we saw a sea shift of the populists that were able to propel Sanders to even run, and he was the right figure to help push that along. I think this idea that Bernie Sanders, as an individual, charismatic, grumpy old guy, yelled Americans into shifting, as opposed to like there's been decades before this, which he was a part of that movement, but it surely was the movement moving these things forward, not Bernie Sanders all of a sudden in the last few years.
Well, I don't think I said that Bernie Sanders by himself picked the movement.
I'm saying that I think the movement was more powerful than Sanders was.
So I don't think this is a chicken and egg thing. I think this is a both thing. I don't think Sanders in and of himself all of a sudden changed people's mind. If that was the case, that would have been 30 years where he would have done that. Yes, though, having somebody to articulate those particular positions at a time where the public is open to them, yeah, that person does get credit for me for doing something like that.
Mondale.
Oh, can I say something? I feel like I'm muted when I'm not speaking, and it's letting you guys go on with these rants that makes no sense. You, sir, no, it's not funny, because what happens is you have people that listen to you and love you, and I listen to and love you, but what you're doing right now is rewriting history. To say that John Edwards only had a statement or something that he made is inaccurate. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton had to make concessions to John Edwards before he dropped out the race. Fighting for universal health care was that concession. So giving Obama credit for universal health care defeats your purpose for Bernie Sanders to stay in this race, because you're saying Bernie should stay in his race so he can get what he wants or he can negotiate. And that's exactly what John Edwards did. Secondly, to say that John Edwards cheated on his wife means you knew something about his relationship that the rest of the public didn't know. You don't know the nature of his wife and his relationship. I can talk to people. I've talked to people that were on that campaign that said something completely different about the nature of that relationship. And to imply something else is you're doing something to his name that shouldn't be done. Furthermore, Bernie was an elected official a long time. And universal health care was not a part of the conversation for most of his elected life. So to say that this old man is the reason that it's a part of the conversation now, and not to say that the entire public or the populace, especially those that support the movement, is not responsible for this, is irresponsible and also ahistorical about what movements do and how things work. Bernie Sanders is not responsible for us being acceptable to universal health care. Health care breaking most people in this country is responsible for the idea of universal health care being a thing. The movement collectively for the past 40 years is responsible for of the conversation. Stop trying to make Bernie Sanders great. Name something progressive that he's passed since he's been in the Senate, and I may concede with you. But I'll save you time. You can't. Screaming from a platform does not do it. Negotiating, working with nonprofits, like John Edwards did, to run pilot programs outside of your government purview is how you do things. Bernie's not done that. Bernie's formed 4 or 5 organizations after the 26 campaign, and none of them, for the most part, are supporting issues. They're all supporting candidates that beef up Bernie Sanders' reputation. That's not the movement, bro. That's politics as usual, especially when you consider he hired the same consultant that Hillary Clinton used. That's not movement, bro. That's politics as usual. Bernie doesn't want to burn down the system. He's been a part of the system forever. Stop talking revolution and activist language to me about a senator. If you truly care about these issues, fight with people and give them their credit, not to an elected official who's been in that position forever.
Jamarl Thomas. Not sure if Jamarl is here. I wanted to give him the first pushback. No, I think I agree more with you, Mondale, on your end of exactly who gets credit and where these movements goes. Like I said, Bernie Sanders, 4 years, somebody was telling me today, he had been to Mississippi only twice between 2016 and 2019. And that's just shocking to me to simply say, look, we did not do well in the South. I don't think he ever was going to win the black vote. And he's obviously been able to compile quite large numbers of black voters, but percentage-wise, he's just not been able to grow there whatsoever. And he needed to have shown at least somewhat of a 10 or 20% grow. And I think he's just not part of those social grassroots movement that people think he wants to. I don't think it's some like malicious bad guy. He's a senator of Vermont. I think that's kind of your point. When you're a senator of Vermont, you're kind of stuck in Vermont.
Just so we're clear for the moment. I mean, that's such a shallow point of view of politics. When I made my point, the point that I made, which was absolutely flat fact, 1,000% true, was that basically Sanders in and of himself should get credit because Sanders was able to pull the conversation forward. Nobody said that Bernie Sanders was the lone man in the dark doing everything by himself. That is a straw man of magnificent contraption, which tells me you don't know what you're talking about. At the end of the day, Sanders, yes, he was a focal point of being around at a time where the public was looking for something fundamentally different. And because of that, yeah, he became a lightning rod. And so on issues of $15 minimum wage, school, education, yeah, he moved it forward much further than anyone else has over the last 20, 30 years. So you can bring up John Edward. I don't particularly care what happened in John Edwards' life. If I want to use that as my reference point for John Edwards, I will use that as my reference point. In regards to John Edwards saying something about healthcare, okay, great, but it still misses the point that when Obama went through, the best that Obama could get through was less than a public option. We are in a different space right now. That space was brought us by Sanders. And you can take issue with, oh, I don't like Bernie Sanders, so I don't want to give Bernie Sanders credit. That's just flagrantly dishonest, honestly. If you're going to look at politics and you're going to be honest about the way politics and the way that the public interacts with, their focal points and all this other stuff, then you have to give credit where credit is due. You can hate Sanders all you want, but if you're being honest, you would come to the conclusion that he was instrumental in this particular, let's say, focal point of this, or the avatar of this particular movement. Yes, he should stay in the race. And yeah, he should stay in the race to try to get everything that he could out of this process. You may go with this idea that John Edwards was negotiating afterwards. That's fair for John Edwards, but Sanders is in this to push items to the left. That's
but Jamarl, before you cut me off, Jamarl, I was trying to get to the point that I think when I hear you speak, it's too much credit to Sanders. Did he move the conversation on the national debate stage between 2016 and 2020? Absolutely. I think the first debate out of the gate, the fact that people were even willing to say, yes, Medicare is a human right, shows that the discourse had changed. How we got there and how that's been moved and how that's been built across the country, how we're seeing people overwhelmingly vote for public options and Medicare for all options in these exit polls across the country, that can't be solely given to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a senator from Vermont. There's people been doing decades-long movement building across the country, and that's why Sanders hasn't had the momentum and inertia to take on the Democratic machine. He hasn't been building a machine for 3 decades. So for him just to step in and say, I'm Bernie Sanders, I've been saying this thing, and now all of a sudden everyone in America is like, yep, Bernie Sanders said that, I think that discredits a lot of the long-term changes that happen politically, socially, and economically that are layered over decades of time. And I at least Mondale can speak for himself. I think that's just what we're both trying to get to think that I can just say, oh, Sanders moved the ball. Well, that discredits decades of movement building and other platforms that may have failed in the moment, may have not gotten adopted that first time, but on the fourth time, after Jesse Jackson runs in the 80s, when John Edwards runs in the early 2000s, and now when Bernie Sanders gets here, to all of a sudden say, oh, those other chips at the well didn't matter, or it was all Sanders. He finally had the sledgehammer to say other people haven't been chipping away at the wall. That to me sounds absurd, and that seems too limited of a historical point just to say Bernie moved it along.
I think the weirdness of that statement, or the absurdity of that statement, is that nobody ever said that. I think that's the weirdness of that statement.
You said John Edwards. You said John Edwards wife cheater.
Basically, you're making the argument that I am arguing that Sanders, all alone by himself, dragged this particular thing to the well.
When you said Sanders. You said Sanders did.
3 times. I've said 3 times that it's a combination between the movements and the individuals at that particular time. I've said it like 3 times.
That's not what you said. You said Sanders. You can listen to the tape. You said Sanders pulled it along. You said John Edwards, wife cheater, and you said Sanders with the help of a movement for decades on. Mondale, sorry, we keep on ducking you out. Go ahead, Mondale.
It's all good. So Jamal, you literally said we can't deny that Sanders pulled this party further in 3 years, 4 years, something to that.
He did pull the party forward.
So, but
that's a fact. Are you saying that's not true? I think that's the thing that's blowing me away about that. I would argue, and I would agree with you, that movements are part of the process. Again, 4th time saying it. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying it for you guys to ignore to try to make whatever point you're making. But are you really going to make the argument that Sanders hasn't moved the ball forward in regards to the discussions that are being had in the Democratic Party?
Let me show you how dangerous it is to give Bernie Sanders credit for work. You literally slipped.
Oh, God.
We were talking.
Okay, go ahead.
You slipped from there. We were talking about universal health care. You slipped in the fact that we're only talking about the fight for 15 because of Bernie Sanders. That is BS to the maximum degree, because we have been doing this. Hundreds of workers walked out of fast food restaurants and afford to walk out of work. In 2012, Bernie wasn't saying anything about $15 an hour. The fight for 15 started in 2012, 4 years before his presidential campaign, yet you still gave him credit for the fight for 15. This is how things written. On the ground is why we have this conversation. Earlier, Bob mentioned More Monday movement. Part of the 10-point plan for the More Monday movement, the Poor People's Campaign, was universal health care in North Carolina. We started getting locked up in 2007, bro. Bernie was not running for president for another 8 years. Stop playing. You keep saying Bernie and not people. I'm always going to push back on that. Bernie is talking about what people are talking about because he's from white America, where everybody gets to vote, even those locked up, where everybody is taken care of because of it's a white safety net. The real people real suffering starts in people who have the answers are people at the edge of it, not Bernie Sanders. These are not Bernie Sanders' ideas. Stop saying it. I'm never going to give him credit for that because I'm from poor eastern North Carolina where people live with their backs against the wall every day fighting to change it. They're fighting it. I bet you this exists in those say that Bernie, reason that it's a national conversation, you're throwing away so many people's stories, so many people's lived experiences, and their hurt and trauma, and they're fighting for it. To say that a white man is the reason people are willing to stand up now, it's problematic. No, I'm not giving Bernie.
Political misfits here in Radio Sputnik. Jamarl, I apologize to our callers there. I think we got lost in the debate there. It's a lot to figure out here what went wrong as Bernie Sanders still struggles to figure out what to do with the rest of his campaign. Jamarl, a few things we didn't get to. I think the interesting here, coming out, the Tulsi Gabbard's brother allegedly saying that they had reached out to Bernie Sanders wanting to know if they could support him or at least openly endorse him, and Sanders rejected her support. I thought that was quite interesting. I might have as well if I was Bernie Sanders. I think Tulsi Gabbard at this point was not going to do him any favors. The gay Russian favorite thing was just going to pop back up. She has obviously a lot of, I don't know, baggage is right. Media establishment has muddied her so much that I don't know if Gabbard would have done much. And so what does Gabbard do? Goes and endorses Biden. I can't really fault her for that if Sanders said no to her endorsement, right?
Yeah, it's a little weird, right? I mean, in 2016, Tulsi Gabbard gets out the race and backs Sanders. And the Democratic Party effectively heaped hatred on her in this kind of weird, almost religious extent for the next X number of years. And then she goes to Sanders this time around. And look, I don't blame Gabbard if she had any level of animosity on this. I mean, ultimately, she was willing to step down for Sanders. Sanders wasn't willing to effectively reach out to her in this particular race. So I guess it's not necessarily shocking. No, it is still kind of shocking. I mean, if I was her, if it was me, I would have just backed Sanders anyway. I wouldn't have cared. It would have been for my own politics. I don't necessarily want this thing of me being an anti-war candidate and then turning around endorsing Joe Biden. It just looks bad. I don't care what Sanders wanted at that point. That would have just been something I did. But I can't fault her. If she's thinking that Sanders is going to go ahead and endorse Joe Biden anyway, she may just think, what's the point in pretending? I'm just going to go ahead and endorse Biden. It's weird.
Other debates we didn't get to, Jamarl. Does the election happen in November?
Yes.
Okay. By phone, by text message, by mail-in, by in-person?
Oh man, that's the question.
I want an American Idol text this number, text 30330 if you want Joe Biden to be president.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I can't. I mean, Americans have a kind of they're rigid in regards to have an ideology on this stuff. I mean, will we be able to kind of shake out this idea of having an election? Like, I don't remember a time when we moved the election. I'm pretty sure we have at some point, but I can't fathom that for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, what's really fascinating too is just to see these primaries getting moved here in Washington, D.C. We have to have a Democratic primary to be able to get who will run at large in the November election. So you're going to see kind of a complex election process as we move forward. Well, as I'm running out of words, Jamarl, we've reached the end of our time here. I just want to pass along, Mondale Robinson got dropped off there, Jamarl. He just said his last words was that, I love Jamarl, but he's wrong. So no matter what happens at our Come Happy.
Fair enough. I think the exact same for him. So
that's great. Big thank you to Mondale Robinson, the Blackmail Voter Project. A big thank you to the economist John Ross. Thank you to all of those who called in. My dearest apologies we didn't get to you. We'll make extra time on Monday to have those conversations. A big thank you to Michelle Whitty for producing our show, Dimitri and Ryan in the studio there running us, and a big thank you to Jamarl Thomas for leading the way here on Political Misfits. We'll be back with you on Monday. Thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to By Any Means Necessary, your Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Sean Blackman, here with Jackie Lukman. And as always, we are your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. And today on By Any Means Necessary, we're talking about how the coronavirus is impacting housing here in the United States. Gonna talk a little bit about some ongoing issues between the U.S. and China in terms of China recently putting out some U.S. journalists. Also going to be talking about how the coronavirus is affecting the already bubbling immigration issue. And of course, as always, at 3:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be taking your calls. But if you would, Jackie, tell them what's on your mind.
Well, Sean, I was listening to Morning Joe this morning. Yes, I do this so that you don't have to, friends. And John Meacham, a presidential historian and declared Republican, said that we should be able to figure out how to hold elections on schedule because we have to uphold democracy no matter what. And these are his exact words. This is the United States of America. We can figure out how to do this. Well, John Meacham, we've never been the United States of America. We're not the United States of America if there are different processes for voting that are available in different states. We're not united when one political party has been able to close polls, limit voting hours, and purge 34 million voters, disproportionately Black voters, from voter registration rolls since 2014, a year after the Shelby v. Holder Supreme Court decision that invalidated a key component of the Voting Rights Act. And we're not a United States when the other political party threatens to penalize states that take the health and safety of their citizens seriously and delay their primaries past June 9 by reducing their delegates by 50% and relocating polling stations in buildings and neighborhoods where elderly and poor senior citizens are living just so they can hold a primary on time to coronate their new king. There's nothing united about this country when the CEOs of the largest corporations can get an audience with the president and tell him what they don't want to pay for in regard to providing support for their underpaid workers in the face of a global pandemic, and they get what they want. But regular citizens and workers have no advocates to demand what we need from the president and this government. And we're sitting here waiting on someone to do something to help us buy groceries and medicine during this crisis. What's united about this country when the president insists on racially targeting Asians by calling COVID-19, the scientific name for the coronavirus, the Chinese virus or the Wuhan flu or any other racist term his acolytes can concoct for it, while assaults on Asian people are rising? I mean, really, that ought not to surprise anyone, to tell you the truth, because how long have we been telling you how anti-Black racism in every institution in this country has always been a problem, has never gone away, and that's why we've never felt like we were a part of these so-called United States? I mean, did people really think Asians wouldn't be made it during this crisis? This country always has to have an it during a crisis. What United States do we have when every elected official around this president, Republican and Democrat alike, who knew this situation was much more serious than the mouthpieces were letting on, didn't break ranks and tell the truth in the interest of public safety? These people don't believe in any United States of America. They believe in every rich man and woman for themselves. That's not even hyperbole, folks. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about how Republican Senator Richard Burr was caught telling members of the private North Carolina Society Club, where members pay $10,000 to hear directly from state representatives, executive branch officials, and business leaders in North Carolina, that Coronavirus was a serious, dangerous, and disruptive threat 3 weeks ago, but he publicly backed the dangerously dismissive narrative that the U.S. was prepared for this outbreak, supporting what Trump conveyed. But since yesterday, it's actually gotten worse, as it has now been revealed that Burr began selling off stocks on February 13th to the tune of somewhere between $628,000 and $1.72 million, selling off holdings in 33 different transactions. He knew what he was doing. He was very deliberate in doing it. And at the time he did this, he was receiving daily COVID-19 briefings as the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. But he wasn't the only one, y'all. Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, whose husband is the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, that's Jeffrey Sprecher, I think that's how you pronounce his name, but we'll just call him the rich guy, who's the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. She and her husband began selling off their stock on the same day that she attended a private Senate Health Committee briefing on coronavirus. Between that meeting on January 24th and throughout February, Loeffler and her husband sold between $1.725 million and $3.1 million in stocks that they owned from companies, many of which have since lost half their value, but not before they could get their cheddar. But as late as March 10th, Loeffler, who's now sitting on an extra $3 million in cash, on top of the $5 million that she's already worth, as late as March 10th, she was telling the public that, quote, the consumer is strong, the economy is strong, and jobs are growing, which puts us in the best economic position to tackle the coronavirus. Senator Jim Inhofe, also a member of the Senate Health Committee, also dumped stocks after that briefing. But if you think it's just Republicans who profited off of knowing how bad this outbreak was going to be in this country while telling you that it was going to be fine, think again. California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein did the same thing. She's on the Senate Intelligence Committee with, guess who? Senator Richard Burr. You know what, y'all? I wonder, did anybody tell you to sell your stocks and your 401ks and your IRAs and your little stock holdings back in January or February? Because that's when they knew how bad this was going to be. That's when they all knew. I haven't even looked at my 401k, folks. I don't even know what it looks like, and I don't want to know. This isn't the United States of America, y'all. These elected officials know it. This is the corporate states of America, and if you have money, you have access to information that the rest of everybody else doesn't have. If you have information, you have power to protect yourself and prepare yourself for the worst. But if you're broke, if you're working stiffs like us, you have to depend on these people who hoard money and information and hope they do right by us. I hope y'all see very clearly by now that many of them will not.
And those are today's talking points, and you are listening to By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Sean Blackman, here with Jackie Lukman, and as always, we're your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
By any means necessary.
And we're going to keep the movement moving on, as they say, and we're now joined by Will Merrifield, a former attorney at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, who is now a candidate for an open at-large city council seat in Washington, D.C. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And, you know, Will, as the coronavirus issue continues to be a reality here in the United States and across the world, I feel like we're already seeing some interplay, if you will, between the virus issue and the already pre-existing issue of homelessness and housing. And it's been reported that homeless families in Los Angeles have seized 12 vacant homes in light of the coronavirus spread. And I think this is an important point to hit on, Will, because a lot of what we're hearing in terms of suggestions from the government and the media is social distancing and self-quarantine. Well, you can't really do that if you don't have a place to stay. You know what I mean? And so it just seems that the homeless people in this country are sort of particularly vulnerable to the coronavirus spread, and that the issue of housing as a human right is really sort of standing out here.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't know that, very many people understand how the homelessness system works at their, at the local levels of their government. In Washington, D.C., I think people would be surprised to understand how penal being homeless is, and especially if you're a single homeless person. So in Washington, D.C., if you're homeless and you want to try to get into a shelter, there aren't enough shelter beds for all, everyone that's homeless in Washington, D.C. So homeless people, single homeless people have to line up every day to access the shelter in the first place. And then once people are in the shelters in the single system, it's an extremely communal environment. So, people are in a large room, they're all together. The sleeping environments are communal environments, like a hostel, open rooms with beds, stacked and open rooms. So the whole system is very, very